Hi and welcome to Full TV. My name is Rafael, and in this video we are going to review a build from the Philippines. So about a week or two ago, someone asked me on one of the comments on one of my videos about a build that he is planning to do, and I saw a couple of problems with it. So I went back and forth in messaging with messaging, and I explained what I think is wrong about the build and what he can improve. And it came down to a point that there were so many things that I figured out along the way, and I discovered more kind of tweaks and problems that arised. So I decided to make a video about it instead of typing everything in the comments, because I think it can also help other people, but more importantly, visualizing and like talking about everything together in this kind of form. I think it's better also for you, for the guy who asked about the build. So I'm gonna do kind of a general explanation about the build and what is the goal of the build and what are we trying to do, and I'll also show you kind of what I did and how I improved it. So looking at this build, at first it doesn't look too much bad, okay, and I don't think it's bad in general. I think it's a pretty okay build, but let's start talking about the case. The case in this build is the Dark Flash DB330M, which is an interesting case because it comes without any fans, as you can see in the picture over here from their website. And also the airflow in this case is a little bit questionable in my eyes, unless you are going with water cooling, as you can see here. Okay, because this case does not have any intake from the front or the side of the case, unlike other traditional fish tank style cases. And the only intake fans that you can put in this case are at the bottom. And if you have a GPU here, the air that is coming from the bottom will go to the GPU, and the rest of the system stays pretty much like not cooled. The fans at the top will act as exhaust, so they take hot air out, which is okay. I mean, having negative air pressure is also fine. It's not the best, but you can live with it. But since we are going with an air cooler in this build, and this is the air cooler that he chose. So this is the air cooler that he chose for the build. And although it might look fine at first, again, our main problem is that this case does not have any intake towards the fan if it will sit here in the middle of the like motherboard, and the GPU will block any fresh air that it's coming from for it. So already we have kind of a huge problem with this case. Again, if you are water cooling, then you don't really need like too much fresh air to go to this area. Although some parts of the motherboard also need fresh air. So in general, I would just avoid this case to be like totally honest, and I would avoid any style of this case if it doesn't have intake fans on the side. Like for example, if you take a look on a case such as the Thermaltake, what is it, 170 TG, I think I did a build on it not that long ago. So as you can see here, we have intake not only on the bottom, but you also have on the side. Now, this style of cases is a little bit more expensive. And the reason why I bring that up is because you will see that this case is very cheap. Not this one, the one that has been chosen in the build. And this one is very cheap because it doesn't feature the fans over here. So the case is more compact. As a result of that, it's a little bit cheaper. But this kind of cases are better for airflow. Also, it's not perfect, okay, because the fans are blowing air not directly on the motherboard, but kind of towards the inner of the case. And if the fans are not very good, then yeah, you also don't really achieve too much performance, right? Okay, and then next we have the PSU. So the power supply here is the Deepcool PF600X. And although at first look, it looks like a good power supply because it has all the 80 plus cybernetics ratings, which is the new standard that they test power supplies and decide if they're like efficient or not. And Deepcool is also a pretty well-known company, but something that you might know or not know, that there is a PSU tier list which lists all the power supplies, not all, but most of power supplies by tiers, and you can know if the power supply is like a good one or is it a bad one, if it's like a mid-range, if it's like a low-end power supply, or even if it's something that you should avoid. Now, this power supply is unfortunately in the avoid tier list. I'll show you. So if you take a look here, if you search for Deepcool in this list, and the model of this power supply is PF600X. Okay, so let's go ahead and search for PF. So over here we can see PF, but everything that is above 550 watt. Okay, and that will be in the tier C low end, which is okay if you are trying to build a budget system. But this power supply is actually, because it is less than 700 watts, is in the tier E on the PSU tier list, and it's a power supply you should avoid buying. Now, look, I myself, I'm using and I bought power supplies that are on tier E. Sometimes if you don't have the budget for it and you don't have a choice, then okay, you buy what you can, okay? But when I see something like this and I want to improve it, then I check other options, and I did manage to get a better power supply. We'll talk about it in a second. Another big problem here is the Asus Prime motherboard that we chose, and not because it's a bad motherboard, it's a totally fine motherboard, but one of the problems that were in the AM4 platform, and this is an AM4 motherboard, is about the support you have for the different series, Ryzen CPU series that AMD released over and over again as time has passed. And you will see why it is important, because this board lacks a very important feature to look for when you are buying an AM4 motherboard, and I will talk about it in a second as well. And this is really connects to the next section here, which is the processor. And the processor here, he says he wants either to go with the Ryzen 5 5600X or the Ryzen 5 5500, which are both good CPUs, but there's another problem here, and that is the thermal design power of those CPUs. The 5600X and the 5500 are totally different CPUs, and the X version is drawing a lot more power than the 5500. So that also brings another problem with our cooler, because if we are going with the 5600X, this cooler won't be sufficient enough, because although it looks nice, it's actually not that big. As you can see here, the fan on it is only a 10 centimeter fan. It's actually a very small cooler. It features, I think, only 3 heat pipes, if I remember correctly. Could be 4, but again, the cooler, the size of the cooler is very, very small, and it is not, it will not be able to handle something like a 5600X. It will work, but it will be a little bit on the hot side, which is something that you don't want. And combining that with a case that has pretty much no airflow towards the middle part of the case over here, okay, it's not a good idea. So if you go with the 5500, and I also told him that in the comments, then the 5500, yeah, sure, it can definitely work because the Ryzen 5 5500 is not a CPU that draws a ton of power, and it will be totally fine. So let's keep looking here, and we can see that the RAM here is actually 32 gigabyte kit. And I also noted something about it, and I will show it later in the video, that going with 32 gigabyte of RAM memory compared to 16 gigabyte of RAM memory in terms of gaming have zero benefit. Like, I'll show it in the video in a moment, but you should not do it. If you do any other kind of work, like for example video editing, or I don't know, some other professional work like programming, stuff like that, you can definitely, and you should, go with 32 gigabytes of memory. But if you're on the budget like this and you are considering going with an RTX 3050 6 gigabytes per second, which is also not the best choice, and I will talk about it in a moment, why I think it's not a good choice and what other better choices we have, then spending more money on something that doesn't give you any performance doesn't make sense. You can save the money here and put it towards your GPU, where you feel a lot more performance coming out of it if you're gaming. And I want to show you here, let me actually pull up this video. Okay, so this is a video from a very known and popular channel, and is also a very trusted channel. It's called Testing Games. Okay, it's a channel with over 500,000 subscribers, and he basically did a test with 16 gigabytes of RAM, 32, 48, and 64. I don't know if he did it like with DDR4 or DDR5. I think he did it with DDR5, yeah. But it will apply the same to DDR4. And let's take a look. Okay, so we have God of War. Okay, and you can see the amount of FPS that each kit is getting. And you can see that there's pretty much no difference. Maybe 1 to 2 FPS of difference between like 16 and 32 and 48 gigabytes, which is not even an option, right? Let's take a look on Stalker 2, for example. So you can see slightly more of a difference, 3 FPS, okay? Which again, when you play a game, it doesn't, like, you don't feel the difference. Maybe in numbers, yes, but you don't feel it. It's not like 30 FPS more, right? It's just 3 frames more. Cyberpunk, for example, no difference. 0.1 FPS difference. Hogwarts Legacy, which is a very demanding title, 1 FPS difference. Star Wars Outlaws, same FPS, 16 gigabytes, 32 gigabytes, same FPS. Now you might see some benefit in the low 0.1% FPS, which is, when you have like this little stutters and stuff like that. But again, there's not a huge difference, and the average FPS is pretty much the same on every game you can think of. There is no reason to go with 32 gigabyte of RAM for gaming. It is nice to have And in DDR5, actually, it is very hard to find 16 gigabyte kits because of like price fluctuation, and just we are advancing with each generation. So for DDR5, you will have most of the basic kits will be 32 gigabytes, but you don't really need it, and that's the whole point. Okay, then we have some more questionable options for SSD. There's the colorful CN600 Pro, which I never heard of, to be honest. I never seen that SSD. It might be good, it might be not. Again, this is something that it's not a big deal. I would prefer to get something a little bit more popular and more known. Maybe it's something that is more available in the Philippines. I don't know. But the one thing that is very questionable is the fans that we added. And not because I think they're bad or anything, but we have a small problem here. So if we take a look on the fans here, and I remind you that this case, although in the pictures it looks like it comes with fans, it actually comes without any fans. So you do need to add fans if you buy this case. So one of the fans we added is the DM12F from the same company, the same brand that makes the case, the Stark Flash, which is ARGB fan. Okay. And if you take a look on the other fans we chose, these are the DR12 Pro. And you can already see that over here it says 4-pin. And 4-pin, it can mean a lot of stuff. But if we are talking about 4-pin RGB and not ARGB, those are two different connectors, and it might not actually work with your motherboard or with your case or with other fans. So let me show you what I mean by this. So if you go 3-pin ARGB versus 4-pin RGB. And 4-pin RGB is the more older standard for RGB connectors. Okay, so you can see here on the right side, this is a 3-pin ARGB connector. Okay, you can see 3-pin. This is a 5-volt connector. Okay, and this is the header on the motherboard that you need to plug it into. And this is the RGB connector. This is a 4-pin 12-volt. This is a totally different connector that you need to plug into your motherboard. Now, not all motherboards have those connectors, and let's take a look on our ASUS motherboard here. I think actually this motherboard might have both, if I remember correctly. Yeah, it has both. You can see here, this is on the bottom left hand side of the motherboard. So it has a 4-pin and a 3-pin RGB and ARGB connectors, but you might have a problem controlling the fans, because if you take a look here, the 3-pack of fans comes with a remote, with a fan hub, and he might have thought that he will be able to plug this fan to this hub and control them. And if this hub is a 4-pin ARGB connector, you cannot connect this to this. Physically, it won't go in. Okay, so because if you take a look here, you can see that there is a blocked pin on the 3-pin ARGB header, like the cable itself. So if we try to plug this into a 4-pin, it will just not go in. So these fans are already incompatible with each other, although even though the motherboard supports it. So another thing that I want to bring up is the budget. And I actually asked him about the budget, and he said that it's around $400. Now, I got confused when I saw that, because $400, to Philippines peso is around 2,300, 330 Philippine peso. Okay, and what I did is I made an Excel sheet because why not? Let me put it here. Okay, so I made an Excel sheet and I put all the list of parts that he made. And I wanted to see what is the price. Now I asked him where he's going to buy the parts, and he told me that he's going to buy it either on Shopee in the Philippines, or there was another option which I think was called Lazada, if I remember correctly. Yeah, Lazada. Now I'm gonna skip Lazada because I saw the prices and the variants they have over there. It wasn't too much, to be honest. So I'm kind of like skipped Lazada over there. But most of the parts I was able to find on Shopee with better prices. And after I took all the parts and put them all together into a list, I saw that the build is way over $400, what he did. Okay, so the option A here is his build. As you can see, the Ryzen 5 5500, the cooler, the Asus Prime motherboard, and all of the rest of the stuff. And this one over here is almost, not almost, but 36,000, 36K. Okay, let's go with that. 36K Philippine pesos, and that is, I think it's around $500 if I remember correctly, to USD. Yeah, so 600 US dollars. Now, to be honest, I don't know how are we going to build a computer with 400. I'm not trying like to disrespect your money or anything like that. I totally understand what it's like to be on a budget, but I did spend a lot of time trying to find parts and make a $400 build, and unfortunately I wasn't able to. Most of the parts that you will see in Shopee, and I even looked at some PC store websites in the Philippines, such as, for example, I think there was one store that was called Easy PC. And I even tried to look for parts here. The prices were pretty similar. I couldn't really make a build for $400. So you will have to spend a little bit more if you want like a good PC. But what I did manage to do is lower down the price a little bit and also make a good selection of parts. So I want to go over the selection of parts, but before we do that, I want to highlight two things. First of all, the motherboard. As you remember, I said there's a very important feature that the Asus Prime motherboard does not have. And that feature is something that is called a BIOS flashback, or Q Flash Plus if it's on Gigabyte. MSI also have a different name for it. Each company have a different name for it. But basically what it means is as follows. If we take a look on our motherboard, let's take a look on the motherboard that he chose, which is the Asus Prime motherboard. Again, it's not a bad motherboard, and everything I'm about to say is all on the theoretical side, okay? It might not be that way, but you will see in a moment what I mean. So we'll go ahead and go to the support page, and we take a look here under CPU and memory support. Okay, so if you take a look here on the CPU support, you can see that we have a list of all the validated BIOS options, and BIOS, for those of you who don't know, is the program or like the piece of software that controls the motherboard. Every small period of time you have BIOS updates, and let me actually show you this. So if we go here for BIOS and firmware, you can see that, for example, the last version, BIOS version, was on September 24th, which was like less than a month ago, I think. Yeah, less than a month ago. We are on the October 12th right now. So you can see that they release BIOS versions pretty frequently, even though this is like an old platform, right? And why this is important? Because these, you need to know one thing. AM4 CPUs are out in the market for a very, very long time. Okay, there's various series and different kind of CPUs. And sometimes what can happen is if you have like an AM4 motherboard and you have a new released CPU, if you don't have the correct BIOS version, it might not support it. So let's, for example, take a look here on the CPU support. Let's take a look on the Ryzen 5 5500, which is the one that we are considering buying. So you can see here that it says it supports this CPU from BIOS version 2423. Now let's go to the BIOS list. Okay. And you can see the versions here. And let me put a little bit more bigger, like so. So you can see version 3634, 3631. Okay. And if we scroll down all the way to 24, 23, something like that, right? There it is, 24, 23. So this BIOS version is from 2021. Now, you would say, yeah, you'll probably, if you buy a motherboard, it's like a new motherboard, right? It might not be. Especially in regions such as the Philippines or other regions, even in the US or wherever you're buying in, okay? You cannot know what kind of a motherboard you're getting and what is the manufacturing date on the motherboard. You can figure it out on the box. If you buy and you get the box, you can see the manufacturing date on the box, but sometimes with like old motherboards, you can get a very old motherboard that doesn't have the correct BIOS version to support your CPU. So what do you do in that case? Well, the only thing you can do if you don't have something that is called BIOS flashback or QFlash Plus is to take an older Ryzen CPU, like for example, a Ryzen 1500, okay, and put it in the motherboard, boot up the system, make an update, then go back and put your new CPU inside the system. Now, of course, if you're buying a new PC, you don't have an old Ryzen CPU at your house. And I actually encountered that problem myself. I had an AM4 system and I bought a new CPU and I wanted to put it in my motherboard and it didn't work and I didn't know why. And it was because the BIOS version on it was not up to date and the system just won't boot. I had to go buy second-hand old Ryzen CPU just to put it in the motherboard so I can update the motherboard. Now, there is a way around it. And the way around it is something that is called BIOS flashback or QFlash Plus or whatever. And if you're not familiar with it, I want to show you how exactly it looks like. Okay, so this is, for example, a Gigabyte motherboard, a one that I chose for one of the options. And if you take a look here, I think I actually downloaded the picture. Yeah. So if you take a look here on this motherboard, you can see over here at the bottom, there's a little button here that says QFlash Plus. Okay, now what this button allows you to do is, let's first roll back a little bit. How do you update BIOS on a motherboard? There's plenty of videos on that on YouTube, but basically you take a flash drive, you download the correct BIOS version from the manufacturer's website. So for example, if you have the Asus motherboard, yes, you go here to BIOS and firmware. And by the way, never, ever download beta versions. This is the worst thing you can do. Trust me. Always download versions that don't have beta in them. And you can see there's a download button here. So you download it, you have a small file, and you take that file, you unzip it, and you put it on a flash drive. Okay, this file right here. Once you put it in the flash drive, you go into BIOS, and there's a BIOS update button. Okay, you press on it, it reads the file, and it updates the software of your motherboard. So, as we said, if you want to do it through the BIOS, you need a working motherboard. And if you can't have a working motherboard, how you update your BIOS then? So there's a very cool little feature that not all motherboards have it. Unfortunately, this Asus motherboard does not have it. Usually on Asus motherboards, let me show you where they put it, because again, each brand does it in a different way. But in Asus motherboards, they usually put a button here. Let me show you actually how it looks like. Okay, so this is, for example, an Asus motherboard. This is the B550, which is also AM4, but this is the Tough Gaming B550 Plus. It's a little bit more expensive motherboard. Again, it's not something that I recommend right now, just to show you exactly what I'm talking about. So if you take a look here, you can see this little button here. It says BIOS FLBK. This is a shortcut for flashback. Okay, and this button, what it allows you to do is, if you can see here, and by the way, if you ever wondered what a USB port that is labeled as BIOS is doing, this is what it is doing. You take your BIOS version that you put on your flash drive, you plug it in here, okay? You do not install any CPU, any RAM onto the motherboard, okay? You don't need to have anything on the motherboard. Not a GPU, not SSD, nothing. You just leave the board as it is, like this. You plug a power supply to it on the 24 pin here, okay? And then, of course, you flip the power supply to make sure it works, and then you press on this button. This will update the BIOS version, the software of your motherboard by itself, without booting into the system, without having any display, without nothing. This is such a cool feature, such a lifesaver feature, because this comes handy not only if like you need to upgrade a CPU or to make sure that your new CPU supports your motherboard or anything like that. Even if you have like a problem, if you have something that is not working and you want to reset the BIOS for whatever reason, or you need to reset the BIOS, then you can do it that way and update the BIOS, and it saves you a ton of time. It's just insane feature, okay? And it is very important because if you buy especially Ryzen CPUs that stay on the same platform each generation, they don't change the motherboards as often as Intel, okay? And you can have sometimes problems if you get a motherboard that was manufactured like 2, 3, 4 years ago, which is definitely can happen, okay? Remember, AMD don't necessarily make new motherboards for like older platforms. Like they focus on the newer platforms, so you might end up like buying, I don't know, like some dead stock or like some motherboards that have been left in the store, and they, just try to move stock as much as possible. So this is something that you need to be careful when you buy, especially if you go with budget systems and you buy older platforms. This is very, very important. Okay, so after looking on Shopee and searching for different kind of motherboards, I did found this Gigabyte B550M DS3H R2. Okay, this is a very important notation here, because there's plenty of models and different kind of variations, as you can see here, even in the picture. Some motherboards that they look very similar, but what I found is this one right here. This is the B550M DS3HR2, and this motherboard have the BIOS QFlash BIOS option over here, and I also made sure that it has other important features like we have in the ASUS motherboard, so we don't miss any important features. So for example, in this motherboard we also have the same RGB and ARGB connectors, although here they are labeled a little bit differently, okay, because each company likes to do it their own way. So you can see the 12 volt 4-pin RGB connector here, and you can see the 5 volt 3-pin ARGB connector over here. Okay, so you have both of them, and I think you even have another one, a couple more over here. Yes, on the top right hand side, above the 24-pin connector, you can see another 4-pin RGB connector and another 3-pin ARGB connector, which is very good. It has 4 RAM slots. It has 2 M.2 slots for your SSD. So you have one here and one here, okay, which is very cool. The layout of the USB is very similar to the ASUS motherboard. And just to show you over here, okay, so this is our B550MA. You can see they are very, very similar motherboards. This motherboard also have 2 M.2 slots, also have 4 RAM slots. Their performance is also will be pretty much the same in terms of like power delivery and power design. They're very similar motherboards, but what the ASUS lacks is the QFlash or BIOS flashback option, which it does not have at the back, and the Gigabyte one does have it, not on the back, but as I showed to you, on the bottom right hand side of the motherboard. Now, I did also find this board for a little bit cheaper than the ASUS Prime motherboard, and let me show you that. So you can see here the ASUS Prime motherboard cost 6,700 Philippine pesos, and the Gigabyte motherboard is 1,000 pesos less. And it's pretty much, again, the same motherboard, but the Gigabyte one has the QFlash option, which will save you a ton of time in case if you buy a motherboard that was manufactured before the release date of your CPU. So even if you like build a computer, plug everything in, and something is not working, you can update the BIOS version of the motherboard without having any display on your computer, which is huge. This is a lifesaver feature, especially in the AM4 platform. Now, in terms of our CPU, I did change our CPU to the Ryzen 5 3500X. And the reason why I did that is because I did try to keep the price as low as possible without compromising performance. So I will show you the performance difference in a second, but I want to show you the price, because the price here is very key to understand like what is a good buy and what is not, because there isn't such a thing as a bad product, but there's a huge emphasis on what is the value of your product and how much you paid for it. Okay, so if you take a look here, the Ryzen 5 3500X cost almost half of the Ryzen 5 5500. And I didn't even talk about the 5600X, which is much stronger CPU and it costs more. Okay, now I want to show you the performance difference between those two. And this is a video here by not a very known channel, but it is the only one that I managed to find, and it looks pretty legit. I also tested and tried to see how this CPU is compared to other CPUs, and I saw some other videos, but I think this one will represent pretty much the best as it can get. And you can see that the performance difference between, oh sorry, I forgot the screen. Okay, it's not full. Okay, you can see that the performance difference between those CPUs is very similar. Again, because the 3500 is an X version and the 5500 is a non-X version, the X versions are a little bit stronger as CPUs, and you can see that in some games they even sometimes outperform like the higher tier. And the Ryzen 5 3500X is actually, if I remember correctly, it is newer than the 5500, because this is a CPU that was released mainly to the Chinese market and to the like whole Asian market, especially in the Philippines. And because this CPU was released after, it actually performs really well. And you can see here that the price difference is not half, okay? Because again, you need to remember that when you are comparing components, you want to see what is the difference, not only in performance, but also in price. And the performance difference is pretty much the same, if not sometimes even better on the 3500X. And you can see here Fortnite on different settings. What game is that? I think this is Hogwarts Legacy. By the way, it looks so. Ragnarok, if I identify this correctly. But yeah, you can see the FPS numbers. Horizon Forbidden West. Let's see this one. You can see pretty much the same FPS. This is PUBG, 150. Pretty much the same. Okay, so those CPUs are pretty much the same in performance, but the price difference is almost half. So it makes more sense to go with this CPU over here instead of the 5500. And because of that, we also needed to get a slightly better cooler. So what I went with, instead of going with the smaller cooler, okay, this Geoshark, which I'm not familiar here. By the way, here you can see how small this cooler is. Even though in the pictures it looks a little bit big, and it has 4 heat pipes and everything, you can see it's actually not that big and it's pretty small. And the size of the cooler contributes a lot to its performance, because the bigger the cooler, the more heat it can dissipate, and as a result of that, the CPU will stay cooler and you have better performance, and also the CPU will stay longer and it will keep itself nice and cool. Now, the cooler that we chose here, which is the Deepcool AK400, is a slightly bigger cooler. Now, it is a little bit more expensive than the Geoshark cooler, but because we saved a lot of money on our CPU, we can invest in a better cooler in case we want to upgrade our CPU in the future. And besides, having a better cooler on our system is always a good option, even if it's a little bit more than what you really need. It's better to have the headroom instead of going on something that is on the limit of what you need. The fan here is a standard normal 12 centimeter or 120 millimeter fan, and this can also impact if, for example, if the fan on your CPU cooler stopped working, for example, and you have a CPU cooler that has a 10 centimeter fan, it is very hard. If this fan, for example, fails and you need to replace it, it is very hard to get a 10 centimeter fan. It's pretty much impossible. It's very unique to this type of cooler. But a 12 centimeter fan, on the other hand, there are plenty of 12 centimeter fans that you can replace, and they're pretty cheap. And it is a good way also to think about reliability of your system or troubleshooting if you need to replace something in case of something fails. And just to show you how capable this fan is, even though it costs almost twice of the price of the Geoshark, this fan can hold up to 220 watt of heat dissipation. Our CPU is not even close to that, but in case, for example, if you want to upgrade in the future to a much stronger CPU, then this CPU cooler will definitely do the job and you won't need to replace the CPU cooler. That way you save money on the long run. You can even take the CPU cooler with you to the next build and to the build after that. And because this is not water cooling or anything like that, it can just hold itself for years to come. So this is a very good, important investment that you should do. Now, the RAM in the system, I did change it to 16 gigabyte, and you can see the price difference between the two. The 16 gigabyte kit again cost almost half of the amount of the 32 gigabyte kit, and because we have pretty much no performance difference between 16 and 32 gigabytes for gaming, it doesn't make any sense to go with a 32 gigabyte kit, and the money saved here we can invest in other parts. For example, I did get a slightly better and a slightly more known SSD, such as this Team Group MP33. Okay, and we have a 512 gigabyte SSD. By the way, you did not specify how much gigabyte the SSD you chose. And considering the budget, I think going with the 512 gigabyte drive will make more sense. And besides, if you really need more storage in the future, because our motherboard, remember, it has two M.2 slots, right? We can add more storage in the future. And if you ran out of M.2 slots, you can also add 2.5-inch SATA SSDs over here. And just to show you what a 2.5-inch SATA SSD is, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, it will look something like this. Okay, so a drive like this, for example, does connect to your motherboard with cables like we used to do with hard drives back in the day. It's much better than a hard drive. It's not as fast as an M.2 NVMe SSD, but it is still a good option also to upgrade storage if you really need to. And our motherboard has 4 SATA ports on it. Okay, we have 1 here and 3 more here. Now, something that is very important to make sure when you consider things like that in terms of storage is to go to the motherboard's manufacturer's website and go to the specification page and see if you have any limitations in terms of storage. What I mean by this, for example, if you take a look here on our motherboard, you can see the list of the option of storage you can put on the motherboard. So you can see one M.2 connector over here, and there's another one here. You can also see what kind of speeds they support. Okay, so for the example, the top slot is a PCI 4.0 by 4 speed or by 2, and the bottom slot is a PCI Gen 3.0 by 2 speed. And sometimes some motherboards, if you occupy one of these slots, it might disable one of the SATA ports that I just showed you, But in this case, you can see that we don't have any mention of that, and manufacturers will mention here with like an asterisk, and they will say, yeah, one of the slots won't work if you occupy both of the M.2 slots, for example. Now, sometimes they don't mention it here, and if you really want to be like 100% covered, you should check the manual. I'll show you how I do that. So let's go to support. We'll go to manual here. I'm gonna download this in English. And because the manual is very long, I'm not gonna search all of it. I'm just gonna press Control F and search for SATA. Okay, we have 28 hits. Let's try to find what is relevant to us. Okay, so we can see here again the same list as we saw on the website, but let's see what else we can spot here. If we can see any mention for limitation or anything of that nature. Let's see here, the SATA connectors confirmed to SATA 6 gigabits standard are compatible with SATA 3 gigabits and SATA 1.5 gigabit standard. Each SATA connector supports a single SATA device. That means that you cannot, for example, connect like a splitter and like use a bunch of drives through one connector. The SATA connectors support RAID. RAID is a technology that allows you to group a few drives together to one single like drive that you can put everything on it. I'm not gonna go too deep into that. If you want, you can look it up, but for most people, RAID is pretty much irrelevant these days. It's mainly if you are going to do like a server or a huge amount of storage and you need something to make backups on and stuff like that. So we're not going to talk about RAID here, but let's see what else we can find. Okay, M.2 connectors support M.2 SATA SSDs and also PCI Express SSDs. Okay, so that's fine. We have two types of M.2 SSDs that we can use in the M.2 slots. And yeah, other than that, I do not see anything else that will limit us in terms of the SATA drives. Yep. So looks like we are covered in this aspect, which is good. Now, the huge improvement I wanted to make in this build was the GPU. And I told you in the comments that a 6 gigabyte RTX 3050, and I said it in the beginning of the video, in my eyes, it's not a very good buy. And I want to show you why I think that is. And it's not something that I think, it's something more that I can prove. And I want to show you this. Okay, so in the comments, I did say that an 8 gigabyte RTX 3050 is much better than a 6 gigabyte version, and it doesn't cost that much more than a 6 gigabyte version. And I just want to show you how big the difference is between those two graphics cards and why you should definitely not go with the 6 gigabyte version. And you might even consider even something that is even better than the RTX 3050 8 gigabyte version. So let's first show the difference here. Okay. So this is a 6 gigabyte RTX 3050 versus an 8 gigabyte RTX 3050, and you can see how big the gap is, almost 10 FPS more with the 8 gigabyte version. And this makes a huge difference when you look on gaming performance. You can see in Cyberpunk, almost 11 FPS difference. Forza Horizon 5, also 10 FPS difference. Alan Wake, which is much more heavier game, 8 FPS difference, which in those kind of games and in this kind of FPS numbers is huge, having 8 FPS more. Red Dead Redemption 2, 11 FPS difference, and I think you get the point. The 8 GB version is much better than the 6 GB version, and it does not cost that much more. If we take a look on the pricing, okay, the RTX 3050 6 GB version will cost you 1,190 Philippine pesos. If you try to look on an RTX 3050 8 GB version, you will see that it costs around 1,400 Philippine pesos. Okay, now some of the listings in Shopee can be sometimes confusing. If you see something like this, for example, when it says it's 6 GB and 8 GB, when you press on the listing and you see this price, this is not actually what you get, but you need to kind of choose here what you want. So an RTX 3050 6 GB will cost 10,879 Philippine pesos, but an 8 gig version, if you press on it, you can see the price is jumping. Now we can afford to go to 1,300 Philippine pesos because remember, we did save money on the CPU, okay, almost 2,000 Philippine pesos. We did upgrade our CPU cooler a little bit, okay, but we also saved money on our motherboard, okay. We saved a ton of money on our RAM because we saw that 16 gigabyte and 32 gigabyte doesn't make a ton of difference in gaming. We did went with slightly better SSD, but it didn't add that much cost, only like 200 Philippine pesos, which is totally acceptable. So going with an RTX 3050 8 gigabyte version totally makes sense and we can afford it. But there is something that is even better in that price range, and if you already spotted here, you can see the ASRock Radeon RX 6600 8 gigabytes. And you can see it costs slightly more, okay? It's almost 1,400, but again, remember how much price and how much money we saved on the other parts. And we even got good parts, right? We got good CPU with pretty much the same performance, good cooler, better cooler, to be more precise. We got a better motherboard, okay, because we have the Q-Flash Plus option on that motherboard, and it is cheaper. But the GPU here, I want to show you how much better the RX 6600 is compared to the RTX 3050. Okay, so this is a benchmark by a very popular YouTube channel called Gaming Bench, and he's using an RTX 3050 8 gigabyte version here, and it compares it to the RX 6600. And I'll just watch, just see how big the difference is and how much better the RX 6600 is. So on the left side we have the RX 6600, and on the right side we have the RTX 3050. And this is the average FPS here. You can see it absolutely destroys the RTX 3050. Even in the low 1%, okay, over here, the bottom, which you remember I told you it's like the little stutters you have in games, it's absolutely destroying that card. Let's see some games here that are more popular. Cyberpunk. Okay, Cyberpunk, which it is a very demanding game. A huge difference between 60 FPS and 80 FPS. GTA 5. Okay, 70 and 50, 65 and 55. Huge difference. God of War. Again, we can see it. You can see that it repeats itself. You can get almost around 20 FPS more in games. Some games you will see that the difference is not that big, but there is definitely a difference, and it repeats itself game after game. You can see that RX 6600 is just destroying the RTX 3050 8GB, not 6.1. So knowing that, okay, some games you will see that the performance is very similar. This is Red Dead Redemption. It's not a huge difference, but it is still a very capable card. And you can see that most of the games you do get a lot more performance with the RX 6600. And again, because both of them cost almost the same price, right? So if you can get the 3050 8GB for 13,000 Philippine pesos, and you can get the RX 6600 for slightly more, then this is a much better buy. No question asked, especially after all the money we saved in other places. This is a much better buy. Now, you do need to keep in mind that some versions of the RX 6600, for example, if you're looking for a white one, it will cost you more. But I would recommend just, in this case, for example, if you find this one, just go with the black one. By the way, I have that same card over here. So I actually bought this card for a build not that long ago, and I have it right here. If you want, you can watch the build that I did with it right over here. Okay, it's a very good card, much better than the RTX 3050 6 or 8GB that you can get, and I highly recommend it. This is a pretty like monstrous budget, probably the most monstrous budget GPU that you can have, and it's totally worth it, even if you are considering cutting down the cost on some of the other parts, if you really can't afford anything better. But you can see that this is the reason why I think the RTX 3050 is a bad buy. It's not something that I think, the numbers show themselves. This card costs almost the same as the RTX 3050 8GB. It destroys the RTX 3050 in performance, and going with the 3050 6GB, it doesn't make a lot of sense if their price is very close to each other. If you can cut the cost on some of the other parts, like the CPU, like the motherboard, like the fact that you don't need 32GB of RAM for gaming, you can definitely afford this card. And not only that, you will see in a moment that I even got you a better power supply and a much better case, and I still went slightly less than what your parts list went with. So this is a huge improvement in performance. This is massive. You will feel the difference in gaming, especially in this kind of budget. You want to squeeze as much as possible. So let's talk a little bit about the case and the power supply, and with that we'll wrap up this video. So as we said, the power supply, is a tier E, which you should avoid. So I searched for a slightly better power supply. I did found this MSI MAG A550BN. I actually used the same power supply myself. I showcased it a couple of times in my build videos. It's a great budget power supply. It's not a tier E power supply, which is very important, and I will show you. We'll go with the PSU tier list here again, and we search ABN. Okay, you can see MSI MAG ABN, which is this model over here. Okay, and you can see this one is tier C. So the tier C, to remind you, is above tier E. Okay, so tier E you should avoid. And over here you can see the PF 600 watt is in tier E, but the ABN is a tier C, and it is low end, and it is totally fine. If you're on a budget, buying a tier C power supply is the best you can have, because tier B will be much more expensive and it doesn't really make sense on a budget build. But tier C, totally, like, it's not, I'm not even gonna say acceptable, because this is what you want. You want to go tier C if you're on a budget. This is the best you can get. And if you're wondering if the amount of wattage is enough for the RX 6600, then we can do a quick Google RX 6600 recommended PSU. You can see I already did that because I do my homework, and you can see that this card requires a 450 or 550 watt PSU. You don't need more than 550. So it's totally more than enough for this card, and it's the best power supply I think you can get for this build. It does cost slightly more than the deep cool one, and you will see that in option C, I did cut it down if you really want to go on a budget, but I also changed some of the other stuff, so I will talk about the option C in a second. But in terms of our case, I did went with the MSI MagForge M100R, and I know this is not the fish tank style case like this Dark Flash DB 330M. I understand that a lot of people like these cases because they look very pretty, but are very, very bad to performance and airflow. Especially this one, which does not have fans on the side, and I talked about it in the beginning. It's terrible. If you're using air cooler, there's no air going inside the case because the fans are at the bottom, will blow air on the GPU, and it would not have air to the CPU. If you put water cooling here, yeah, sure, but we're not, and I don't recommend you to put water cooling in this build. Not only because of the budget, but also because it's less reliable. But even if you do go with water cooling, you still don't have enough cooling for the motherboard. And in general, I would just avoid this case. I know it looks pretty, but it's terrible in terms of performance. And it is important to keep your components cool, because if you keep them cool, they will last longer. That's as simple as that, okay? So take care of your components and make sure that your case is well airflowed. Is that a word? I don't know. But either way, if you take a look on the case that I chose, this is the MSI MagForge M100R. A very basic, simple case, but fantastic in terms of airflow. You can see it comes with 4 fans pre-installed. You don't need to add any fans. I also noted it here that the fans are included with the case. It comes with 4 fans, 3 at the front for intake, 1 at the back for exhaust. Excellent case. Compact, simple, nothing too fancy, but I think it looks really elegant, and most importantly, it will have good airflow for your system. By the way, if you care about the layout at the top of the case, you'll have a power button, a reset button, 1 USB 3.0 port, 2 USB 2.0 ports, microphone, headphone jack, and you also have this little button right here, which is a LED switch button. Every time you press on it, it will change the colors on the fans on the case, which is pretty nice. So I really highly recommend this case. You can get it in the black version, in the white version if you want. I think the white version costs slightly more, but it's not a huge difference. You can see it's only like around 200 Philippine pesos, which is totally fine. And if you want another option which will be slightly cheaper, around 1,000 Philippine pesos cheaper, you can go with pretty much the same configuration. I left the same CPU, okay, because I think for this price, it's the best you can get. It's the best value that you can get because the performance is pretty much the same as the 5500, and it costs almost half of that. Okay, I got a slightly different cooler, okay, which is the Thermalright. We need to do captcha here. Okay, so this is the Thermalright AX120. And I did it because I just wanted to show you another example for a good cooler if you want a cooler that has some RGB on it, because the AK400 does not have any RGB on it. So if you want something that looks a little bit nicer, you can get this one on black or on white if you decide to go with the white case. One thing you need to keep in mind is that unfortunately, because the way that the RGB connectors are working with this case, you won't be able to sync the RGB on the cooler with the case. Okay, it will be separate, but I think it will still look nice. It's something that you need to keep in mind because in some cases it might be available to plug everything together and control everything together. Usually in more expensive cases, in this case, it's a more budget one, so you won't have that option, but I think it will still look nice. It's also a little bit cheaper than the Deepcool one. I think the Deepcool one will have better performance, so if you don't care about RGB that much, I would probably go for this one. This is an excellent cooler that will serve you for years down the road, no matter which CPU you decide to put on it. Unless you go with like I don't know, crazy overclocking Ryzen 9 or something like that, but in that case you probably invest in some like very high-end cooling or something. But if you, for example, want to upgrade to like I don't know, Ryzen 5700X or Ryzen 7, for example, like this one, 5700X, right? So this one was a much stronger CPU. I actually have the 5700X3D on my gaming system, and I can tell you it's absolutely destroys any game I put on it. So even if you go with something that is a little bit more stronger and needs better cooling, this cooler will deliver the job just fine, and you will have all the performance you need for it. Now, as for the other stuff, I left the same motherboard because I couldn't really find any other option that is cheap enough, good enough, and also have the Q-Flash Plus option. And this is very, very crucial if for whatever reason the BIOS version on your motherboard won't support the CPU. You can easily update it. By the way, if it will be the case for you and you need help with doing the update, you can feel free to contact me, and I will be more than happy to help you, guide you how to do that if you ever need to. But you also have a ton of videos on YouTube on how to do that. I also learned it that way. I left the same Team Group 16 gigabyte RAM kit, and you can see it here. It's pretty much the same kit that you wanted to take, but it's a 16 gigabyte kit and not 32 gigabyte kit. You don't really need the 32 gigabyte kit for gaming. I left the same SSD. It's the Team Group MP33, which I think is a very good budget SSD. Known brand, and it's very, very popular. It's bought by many, many people, and it just works perfectly fine. I left the same GPU, the RX 6608 gigabyte version. I went with the Deepcool FPF600X, which is the power supply that you chose. And the reason why I did that is because I did try to save a little bit more money. You did say that your budget is 400 US dollars. Again, I couldn't really get to that budget without making like huge compromises, like getting a very low-end GPU with like 4 GB. It just doesn't make sense. To be honest, at that point, I wouldn't even bother to assemble the computer because it won't be enough for gaming. And I think you will much rather wait like a little bit, save more money, wait like a month or two or whatever it takes to save a little bit more money and get a good system, a system that will last for you for years. A system like this can definitely take you 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. You can upgrade it. That's what I did. I have on my gaming system an AM4 system that I bought with a very basic CPU. I had also, I think it was a GTX 1660 Super, which I upgraded to an RTX 3060 Ti. And I upgraded the CPU down the road, and I had the same system for like 6 years or maybe even more than that. I think it's like 6 or 7 years, and I'm very happy with it. So if you do want to get as low as possible, you can go with the deep cool power supply. Yes, it is tier E, but as I said in the beginning of the video, even I myself bought very bad power supplies. This is not a very bad power supply. This actually is somewhat okay. It's like if you take a look on the PSU tier list, you have power supplies that are worse than tier E. You have tier F, which is replaced immediately. Okay, and I can tell you, I'm guilty of that. I have a power supply in my system, the same system that I'm using right now to record this video, from the tier F list. I have the Gigabyte PGM. I think it's like a 750 watt power supply. I bought the system secondhand. It was all pre-assembled, and it works totally fine for the last 3 years. Yeah, 2.5 years, I think, something like that. So yeah, I'm not taking you to tier F, even though I'm guilty of that myself. But tier E, okay, we want to save a little bit money. I totally get that. 500 Philippine pesos, 400 Philippine pesos. It's a lot of money. Every dollar count. So yeah, I totally get that. And I also found a little bit cheaper option for the same MSI MagForge M100R case. Okay, so this is the case that I went with option B. But in option C, I found the same case for a little bit cheaper. You can see around 500 Philippine pesos cheaper. And this is the MagForge M100A, not R. Okay, so we have the A, M100A, and you have the M100R. And you probably ask yourself, what is the difference between the two? The difference is that M100A does not have an option to change the RGB lightings on the case. Okay, so if you remember, I told you that on top of the case, you can see it has pretty much the same layout. This button right here, I think it only shut down the RGB. You cannot change the colors on the case RGB. Okay, so you can see the case looks pretty much the same, okay, as the R version. This is the A version, this is the R version. You can see they look pretty much the same, but the A version is a little bit cheaper because the fans here are not ARGB, they're not addressable. You cannot change their colors. So that's why it's also a little bit cheaper. And if you do want to save and you don't care about RGB that much, this is the way to save it. It won't hurt any performance, which I think is the most important part. And with that said, I think this is what I would go for, right? So if in the end of the day you're building a gaming PC, you want to get as much performance as possible, even though if it means that you need to, you know, compromise some aesthetics. I mean, not everything that looks beautiful is functional. In this case, it's not very good for airflow. It's not very good for the budget itself. I also think if you add the money you spend on the fans, you get pretty much the same price of this MSI case. So you spend the same money, even though the case looks cheaper, okay? And the end of the day, you add the fan at the back is 300 Philippine pesos, so it's 2,000, right? And then you add the free pack of fans, you get 3,000 Philippine pesos, which is the same money you pay for the MSI MagForge case. Yes, it doesn't look as pretty, but trust me, the performance will be much better, and the system will stay much cooler. So with that said, this is where I'm at. This is what I think, and I really hope this helps. Of course, I will put down in the description or in the pinned comment all the parts that I listed here. We'll try to organize it in the same way that I showed it here in the video, so you can go by yourself and search the links and see the parts and everything that we talked about. And if you have any further questions, you need anything that like you need more clarification about anything that I showed in this video, please let me know. I really tried to cover as much as possible and really give you all the information that you need, and I really hope this helps. So let me know what do you think about it. If you need any further advice on what to do, what to choose from, I'm here for you. Stay blessed, stay safe, I love you, and have a good rest of your day. See you. Bye bye.